Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here, and this is the video for Module 1. So this week you're going to read chapters 3 and 4 in your text. So we're starting at chapter 3, and again I mentioned in the intro our time is shortened because this is a 6-week class. So chapter 1 and 2 we're going to skip for now, and I think chapter 3 makes sense as far as early American history because it's really covering that time span between 1600 and I think 1620 or so. And the reason that time span is important as far as English colonization of North America, that's when it all happens. So 1607 is the first settlement in Jamestown, Virginia, by the Virginia Company, and then in 1620 the settlement at Plymouth, and then Massachusetts Bay. So the settlement in the South first, 1607, and then the settlement in the North in what's now Massachusetts in 1620, and then in 1628 with Massachusetts Bay. You don't need to remember any of those dates. I don't think that's really helpful to any of us, but just know, prior to that time, there were no permanent English settlements in North America. So what was in North America at the time, of course, were Native Americans, and as you read through these chapters, you'll learn a little bit more about that. The other significant date is 1609, so slavery starts in the South in 1609. Tobacco farming is sort of the big deal there, and again, as you read through the chapter, you'll read more about it. Chapter 4 talks about continental empires, and I think one of the things to think about here is at the time of exploration and colonization in the early 1600s, France and England, Spain, Portugal, but really France and England were really dominant players as far as the sea lanes are concerned. And operating under a system of mercantilism, these countries wanted to gain as much wealth as possible. So this idea of the New World, North America, finding gold and riches and bringing back money for the mother country was sort of a big deal. And that's a motivation throughout these first few chapters of the book, that it's all about England and France and Spain to some extent, and these foreign rivalries that are trying to take land in the Western Hemisphere to gain more currency or gain more money for their country. So you'll read a little bit about that in Chapter 4, these continental empires. The other thing to pay attention to in Chapter 4, you're going to read about a guy named John Locke, and I'm just sort of sneaking over, looking at my page numbers here. So around page 93, right in there, you'll read about John Locke, and the reason Locke is important, and again, you really don't have to remember his name so much, but this notion of liberalism and this notion of individual liberties is sort of intertwined with the New World. In other words, as Europeans and as English colonized what was to become the United States, this idea of personal liberties took hold as well. And even though we don't get up to the Constitution or the Revolution for another 100 and 150 years after chapters 3 and 4, this idea of liberalism, and think of the base word of liberty there, starts to take hold. So it's important to take that away from chapter 4. The last thing I want to do is I want to talk to you a little bit about the assignments the assignment that's due for this week, and it's due on Saturday, and it's an assignment I call the winners and losers assignment, and it's worth 200 points. So what you need to do is I want you to write a paper, and it needs to be at least 250 words, which should be about a half a page. It can be longer if you'd like. Do it in Microsoft Word. Double-spaced is fine. Don't use any weird fonts or anything like that. But the winners and losers assignment is pretty straightforward. I want you to pick a group or individuals out of the readings, so chapter 3 or chapter 4, and tell me who the winners were historically and who the losers were historically in that reading. So you can pick one individual from each side, you can pick nations or countries, but I want you to look at this as the fact that the English colonized North America, and who paid the price, who came out ahead, who lost on the deal. So I'm not going to give you any more hints because it's a really easy assignment, but the reason I talk in terms of winners and losers is because I think for history to be useful, we need to see or understand what the lessons are. In other words, historically speaking, if any person is exploited, if any country, nation, or person forces their own values or tries to take things or take land from someone else, there's always someone who comes out ahead and there's always someone who loses. And I think when we're studying history, that's one of the most important lessons, because it's pervasive even today in continental empires, in the Middle East, in political plays, what have you. There's always a winner, there's always a loser, and I think for history to be useful, we need to learn the lessons that one group or one person can't dominate or impose their beliefs on someone else. It never works, and it never will work. So I want you to think in terms of winners and losers. The other useful thing when we're thinking in those terms is it gives us an idea of how perspectives change the narrative. So in other words, if you're writing a history that's Western-centric, which our textbook is to some extent, it's coming from the voice of historians, most of them with classic education, a PhD in history like mine, and we're not writing from the perspective of the other groups. So a history written by the English, perhaps, is going to be a lot different than a history written by slaves or a history written by Native Americans. So when you write your paper, I want you to think in those terms. How might a history written by one of these groups that was exploited look differently than a history written by the victors? You may have heard that before, that the victors, always tell the story and always tell the narrative. So I'm not going to give you any more hints. I don't think this is a hard assignment. There's no right or wrong here. But just go through and talk about some winners and losers, and then also talk about briefly how a history written by someone on the losing side might look different than a history written by someone on the winning side, and also identify any biases you see in the book. So don't stress out over this, just do the best you can. It's really important that you look at the rubric I posted. That tells you what you have to do to get a good grade. So, the biggies, the real simple things are, make sure there's no misspellings, make sure your grammar's correct, make sure you read your paper back to yourself before you turn it in to make sure all the words are correct and you don't have any sentences that don't make sense. But also pay attention to the little bullet points of the things I want included in the paper, and make sure you check off each one of those, and that way you can be assured that you'll get a good grade. So I'm not a tough grader, but at the same time I think since this is a college class, we need to write at a college level. So that's it for this week, Chapters 3, Chapter 4. Do this assignment. Assignment's due by Saturday at midnight. I will grade it as soon as I can. And then for next week, you're going to read Chapter 5 and 6, and we're going to have a quiz. So that's it for now. I hope you're having a great week. If you have any questions, let me know. Take care. Bye-bye.